Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, welcome today. And I'd like to introduce to you our guest lecturer, Professor Dominic Thor, a president of Geneva College of Longevity Science. Please.
I think so. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I hope I'm going to speak about something that you will be interested in, which is longevity medicine or how physicians should approach this topic. The Geneva College of Longevity Science is a private academic institution in Geneva, as the name says. We are educating mostly doctors. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds. It's a very integrative field, but at the same time, we are conscious of the fact that healthcare providers are the ones that are being approached by private individuals, super excited about this trend towards a more preventative healthcare system, reading about longevity, hearing those podcasts, looking at Netflix shows, whatever you see trending on social media, you hear about peptides. So I think it's a big challenge for average doctors, and I'm very happy to say that we try and help them to sift through the noise. And the good thing to be said about medical doctors is that they're used to be educated in academia. So this gives us an opportunity that they actually take the time and invest into continuing education as they know it. So very quickly, who we are, I told you it's a private school. We initially tried setting up an institute at one of the many universities where our faculty is coming from. Problem is, it's a young field, it's integrative, it's not just medical science, it's a lot of different things that I will be talking about. And we have a master's program, we're going to add a PhD research program next year. We're having a lot of doctors that come in, spending time with us, it's mostly online, for continuing medical education, continuous training, and we also teach professionals in adjacent fields like physiotherapy, nutritionists, fitness coaches, because a lot of longevity is about lifestyle, as you probably know. We do semester symposia, so these are conferences in the space. We also work with a number of conferences that are popping up everywhere to ensure that there is a certain kind of academic grounding and quality, but these are mostly privately organized organizations or conferences where it's about money, and we try to uphold a certain level. We work on clinical guidelines, regulatory blueprints, and we even are now about to create our first publication, which is not, I would say, 100% scientific, or as scientific as maybe the some more, let's say, business-oriented publications are, like the McKinsey quarterly or something, where we look at more at the strategic side and how this science is embedding itself across many disciplines, so not just medicine, but also hospitality, beauty, wellness, fitness, whatever. So it will be a very broad lecture here today. But just in order to sort of remind you when we talk about longevity science, what it is all about. It's, yes, extending healthy lifespans. So I mentioned this before in my talk in the morning, that a lot of people, when you say longevity, they create like a reaction where people say, I'm not interested in living longer, because I know I have family, relatives that lived to an old age, but they had lots of diseases and problems, and they didn't enjoy their life so much. So the most important thing to remember when we talk about longevity, you could use other terms like health span or modulating your lifespan in a way that allows you to age gracefully and healthy. That is what we're talking about. Enhancing quality of life of patients. And it's a data-driven approach. It's ultra-personalized. It's really down to each patient, which is quite interesting because it's completely different. Each clinic is different, each patient is different, each approach is different. And that has, to some degree, to do with the fact that there are not many protocols out there, but also simply due to the fact that people are different and lead different lives, they come from different regions, and we have to adapt to that. And in order to do so, we need to 100% understand our patients. We need to make it transparent through diagnostics, and we generate tons of data. And for that data to make sense, we need new technologies like AI or at least machine learning. Now, this gives you a short overview. I'm not sure you can read that, but just the different parts that make up longevity science, right? So when we talk about it, of course, we talk a lot about biology, medicine, biochemistry, neuroscience, everything that relates to our body, regenerative medicine, immune system, and so on. But at the same time, it's also about technological breakthroughs, because technology is moving fast and we need that for the diagnostic part and also the interventional one. So it goes into AI and robotics and biotech and etc. And the problem here is this field is new. You can compare it maybe to public health. So public health is important because we discuss policy, we discuss economics, how we can make this more affordable to people. Actuarial science, so meaning how can we get insurance to actually pay for these things and how it's going to affect our healthcare system and the social security system, bioethics, how much of that should we do? Do we need to do gene editing? How about stem cell treatments, etc.? This is a question of law. Many of the things that we are teaching about, they are not accessible to doctors in Switzerland, for instance, but they're used every day in Southeast Asia or Dubai. And then, of course, psychology plays a big part, really, sociology, demography. These are things, you know, when we talk about healthy aging, sometimes it's not about medical intervention. Maybe it's about, you know, people and their lifestyle, how they live in their communities, how they interact with each other. What is the environment like? So it's a very, very broad field, which makes it so very interesting. There are challenges in longevity education in a way that traditional curricula, I think at the moment, can't really include everything. It's just too much, and therefore we decided to do it as a postgraduate program for people that have a good background in biology, in medicine, and in pharmacology, etc. And we look at, of course, the biology of aging, aging research, as in what are the hallmarks of aging, what about age-associated diseases, cognitive function, but also in healthcare, as in the diagnostics, the interventions, also personalized therapy, lifestyle. I mean, there is lifestyle medicine, but lifestyle as a whole is extremely important, including the mental and emotional aspects, technology, policy, as I said, and social dimensions. So this is all part of our master's program that is essentially a one-year program where you go to 10 different courses addressing all these things. Now, when I mentioned before that longevity medicine is ultra-personalized, the funny thing is the way that you deal with the patients is actually not personalized. It's always following the same logic, which is you need to understand the patient. So there is a patient onboarding. Whatever clinic we're talking about, you first need to understand the patient. So we need to have a baseline assessment. And based on this understanding, you can then formulate interventions of all kinds. And when you implement them, you need to monitor them and you have to reassess and check. I think this is the biggest thing to keep in mind, this constant understanding, the journey of the patient, where you will be part of that. And with the changing age of the patient, also the interventions are going to change. The easiest example is lifestyle intervention, where when you grow older, you will do different kinds of sports. Different kinds of challenges, maybe becoming less harsh on the body, like moving away from weights to machines to TheraBands, whatever, so not to overdo it when it comes, you know, to your more functional aspects, knee, joints, whatever. So it's a continuous program. Now, when we talk about what is a longevity clinic, again, it's all over. So we see, very successfully so, virtual clinics. I'm a bit liberal with that term because not everything is medical. But it's essentially companies that tell you, you can use our tests even at home. We send them to you and then we know you. We give you supplements or something that you can buy online. And it's actually a quite interesting approach, and sometimes it's mixed with actual telemedicine, so there is a medical component there. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, is these concierge physicians. So maybe you know Peter Thiel and others. So they're very famous for having a very elite, small kind of clientele, just a few Hollywood stars. They spend a lot of time with those. They pay $100,000 US or whatever per year. And you don't have a fancy clinic, you go to your patient's home, because what you need is to understand the patient. So you draw blood and you have them do some tests. It doesn't need to be like in a setting. on the other hand, people like this. So you have the prestige clinics. Is that Clinique La Paris, Shah, many others, Eon Clinic in Dubai, often in a very fancy setting, in a five-star hotel even, sometimes combined with hotel services. So people go there, or sometimes it's people having rare diseases, but they do stem cell treatments also for anti-aging purposes. So you check into the hotel, you have all that fantastic experience. So very different. And then you have hospitals. Not so much, of course, here in Europe, but you have them in, again, Dubai, other places, Singapore, where longevity clinic is part of a hospital. And I think that is very interesting as a concept, because you have access to all the diagnostic tools that they have. MRI, imaging technologies in general, the labs inside the building, but it doesn't end there. You have like everything. It's very commercial, unfortunately. So you have wellness-centered clinics that do a little bit of IV drips and NAD infusions and say they're a longevity clinic. You get hotels, you get biohacking studios. So it's really hard to pin down what a longevity clinic actually is, because there are no guidelines, well, in some places, when we come to that. Again, what is a longevity physician? And that is something at the moment that you guys, when you're ready, decide whether you're going to be or not, because there is no specialty at the moment. So the question is, what does that mean? No board certification or nothing? I think there are a number of specialties that maybe lend themselves to producing great longevity physicians, because if you're looking into internal medicine, specialists on hormones, these are also family medicine to some point. These are people that are used to working with patients constantly. If you look maybe more towards regenerative medicine, and let's say from that part, aesthetic medicine or plastic surgery, then you might say, well, these guys are more used to just having people go under surgery, doing something once and then be out of the practice again. So it's a mentality thing to some point. Do you want to constantly work with patients? Do you want to have that interaction? And it's a mindset thing, personality thing, and to some point, of course, also a skill set that you need to acquire. And for that, at the moment, you are pretty much learn. So it's for you to learn that from publications, from word of mouth, from doing your own research, and unfortunately, a lot of that research now involves going on social media. And I don't have anything against social media. I think Huberman, for instance, is a good scientist, but they all have something to sell. Plus, the medium, you know, it has to be entertaining. Now, how entertaining is a lecture normally? I try my best, but it's limited entertainment factor. Of course, it's different when you do a funny TikTok video, but in 30 seconds, I mean, how much information are you actually going to get about that peptide? And these guys want to sell it to you. So it's good that we try and, you know, bring that into the academic world, because we need people to educate about it that don't want to sell something. Now, the core competencies in longevity medicine, there are a couple. We try to sort of differentiate between the ones that are more, let's say, developed versus they are part of your personality, right? So you need a tiered approach. You need to, like, step by step, go through medical intervention in order for it to make sense and ground that in diagnostics. You need to integrate technology, which is going to be a challenge, I think, to many people with a medical background, because this is coming in right here. I mean, obviously, I had the wonderful chance to be invited here by a department that is very actively involved in research. So, I mean, they work with technology every day, but the clinicians, right, very often they didn't touch a computer for 20 years, and now they're expected to talk about longevity, and that includes tests or using AI companions or whatever. And you need to work together with others, we come to that, and patient education, because I'm going to share some data here. It's a complex field, it's a complex topic, and you will give your patients complex guidance. Do they stick to that? I mean, very often they can't even follow the simple routine of taking a pill every day. If you give them something that's changing their whole life, it's very hard to actually realize that. Now, this tiered approach, very often you see longevity medicine depicted as a pyramid, right? Which makes sense. You have the simple stuff first. You do something about your lifestyle, because this has been shown clinically to increase life expectations and increase quality of life. So you do sports, you look after the way that you eat and drink, not too much, hopefully. And you can do something on top of that that is maybe not so much invasive. Think about supplements, although that is a category that is vast. And the question is it really a supplement, or is it just a company trying to sell you something that could be chemical, non-regulated, whatever. And the doctor is super important because he remains in the center of this whole process. This is why we created that same model, not as a pyramid, but more like an hourglass, where we said, okay, the basics at the bottom, yes, the more fancy stuff at the top, but the doctor in the middle of it. Both steering the team of experts that we come to talk about, but also being guided himself by the diagnostics that I continuously run. Remember, I told you this is like a continuous process. We don't just test once. So for instance, I try to get tested like every 3 months. I do blood panels, extended ones, and then whatever comes up. So I get an opportunity to do a lot of these things, and it's always interesting, and it allows me to maybe, thankfully there is no big things there, but to steer myself into a direction where I think in the long term this is going to pay off. Now, in the diagnostics and anamnesis, of course you get everything that you have covered so far, medical-wise, right? Talking about dermatology, oncology, surgery, whatever that you need to understand the patient, and family history, of course, is important. And then we go into the things that are maybe a little bit more sexy at the moment. You know, all these multi-biomic testing, so your genes, you try to find out, okay, is there maybe some inherent risk for some things, whatever that may be. The epigenetics, right? So which of these genes that we possess are we actively triggering through our lifestyles? The microbiome has been mentioned a lot lately. Not so much fun to analyze that, but of course, blood biomarkers give you a wonderful insight into what's happening. And then proteomics, transcriptomics. So looking at what is it that your genes, when they're activated, are producing in your body. So that gives you also some quite interesting thing. And then there's new ways to assess the basic stuff, right? So your body composition with DEXA scans or VO2 max, how fit are you? These are things, I mean, that can be done in many ways. You can do simple assessments like grip strength or something, to assess whether people have the opportunity when you grow older with muscle loss, muscle wasting, sarcopenia, whatever going on, if they can still go and do their groceries or lead an active life. That is extremely important. You have to look at the patient's exposome. This is not so much a factor maybe here, but again, those hubs in Dubai or whatever, I mean, this is not a healthy environment. It's extremely hot, it's extremely dry, there is pollution, there is mold in the buildings, a lot of things that you need to take care of. Mental health, I think that is especially challenging for a lot of these physicians because they're not educated as psychologists, and they feel a bit shy about addressing these issues, but it's actually very important, and you see tons of studies that show you how you can beneficially influence healthy aging through looking after the well-being, psychological, mental well-being of your patients. And then, of course, lifestyle, digitomics, wearables, so lots of factors coming in here. And this is one of the challenges, right? So you, as doctors, when you graduate, will have way more insight into patients than you used to have, not just the blood panel. You have people that happily wear these rings to track their sleep, they count their steps, they have tons of apps on their phones installed. Maybe they use some at-home tests, they love to use these aging clocks, biomarkers of aging, if you will, not precise but interesting, giving you some simple numbers to maybe act upon, telling you, well, biologically you're only like, I don't know, 30, but chronologically you're 38. Again, not super precise, but interesting maybe to give you like a direction of where things are heading. And we are working on predictive AI models that help the physicians to show where is this journey going with a patient, or simulate what could be the intervention that we think could be helpful, and where does this take a patient. And then, of course, there are things that you hear back reported by the patient, like what is the lifestyle of the patient, maybe guided by your influence and environmental factors, and all that needs to come together. So there are some companies now helping develop software to sort of map these patients. Risky again, because you're giving access to companies, to patient data, but very interesting. Now, what we see in our study program. We have about 60 people in our faculty with very different backgrounds. It's extremely vital if you want to go into that space to understand that you are probably not going to be an expert in every part. So it's interdisciplinary. You obviously have to work with other experts. When you do these screenings, you get a very deep understanding of your patient, but there might be problems that arise where you didn't understand. You need to send somebody over to an endocrinologist, whatever, or hopefully not, but maybe there's some cancer issues or something. So you have to work not just with your staff, not just with external laboratories. You might, when you think about lifestyle intervention, you want to work with fitness coaches, with nutritionists, with physiotherapists, which is, by the way, a group of people that we also educate, because again, there is two different ways of going about it. It's not just when you talk about fitness, it's not just pushing your limits. There's a way to do it in a healthy fashion, and then maybe to go beyond that. And you need to keep yourself updated, because there's so much happening in the field. And I think this is one reason for us to exist, that we help people, doctors very often, to sift through the noise of what's happening, what's being published, and so on. Policy is a big part of what we unfortunately have to deal with, unless there is a regulation in place where we can trust that we are in a safe space, because as a medical provider, you don't want to take any risks. And it's great to think about the best for your patients. So on an individual level, you have ethical questions, not just medical ones, what could be the best thing for them. But in the end, it's also about legal consequences that you might be facing if you're endorsing stuff that is not available to you from a legal perspective. Now, this is patient education. This is a topic that I'd like to mention here, because I think it's underrepresented in medical curricula. It's the question of how can I deal and how can I induce lifestyle changes or changes in the behavior of patients, making them stick with the advice that you're giving them. And these numbers are from the US, and they are like very, very disappointing. Like in the US, non-compliance rates in hypertension, which is something that we clearly understand, which we can diagnose exactly, and where we very clearly also know what's meant to happen. The non-compliance rate is 93%, and I think that shows us, because there we also talk a lot about lifestyle changes, what you eat and how you move around, etc. People are just too lazy. They look for the easy solution. So when you will be a doctor, they will come to you and they will say, oh yeah, doctor, I know I should be doing this or that, but I read about whatever, it should be one or some other kind of peptides or this other new technology, whatever is going to be around in a couple of years. And they will press you for maybe doing this and whether they're eligible or not. So it's actually quite hard to overcome this, and I think we should all try and build people skills in order to do so. There are some guidelines here, what can be done. I think you have to be creative in putting together treatment plans that resonate with the patient. Remember, if you talk about longevity medicine, like aesthetics, it's privately paid for. So this is not a hospital setting, this is a private clinic, right? Where they expect you to come up with something that actually helps them. And if it's just a piece of paper with recommendations that they don't follow up with, they will be unhappy. So you have to tailor make it to them, you have to enhance your communication skills, you have to create a situation where they can see first results. If somebody comes in and they're obese, and you tell them, well, you should be like running for 2 hours per day, this is not going to cut it. So you have to create and foster motivation. And I'm saying this because this is one of the challenges. My doctor is super well deep into the research. They can come up with a wonderful plan for a patient that is very theoretic, but in the end doesn't work out. So when we look at the other side, we mentioned before diagnostics. Looking at intervention, it's quite interesting. I mentioned a couple of times, everything starts with lifestyle. I think because of clinical evidence that we have, it works. With safety, we know nothing can really go wrong when we get them to eat a little bit less and do more workouts. There is other factors that are closely related, sleep quality, mental issues, and you can help a lot with that. I just spoke to some students outside and mentioned that meditation actually seems to be working very well. You have to get into that. Maybe it's more conscious breathing, maybe it's other things. I mean, it's actually praying does help too for some people. You see biomarkers being affected by that, etc. And of course, longevity medicine is still medicine, so we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're building upon what's out there in many medical specialties. And I think maybe we are a little bit more extensive in terms of checkups. We try to hammer home some recent findings like HRT, hormone replacement therapy, that for a long time has been maybe misunderstood, and now I think is back in the center of attention as something that's especially important for women of a certain age and starting that early enough. And then there are these advanced interventional programs, technologies, services, and this is what all the discussion is all about. Because the rest before, everybody sort of agrees. It's boring, but yeah, you can do it to certain degrees. But this regenerative medicine stuff, this is what people are talking about. And what we try to do here is sort of make a list between what's available basically everywhere to what is under intense scrutiny and therefore very much limited and off limits. So supplements. Supplements is huge. It's the biggest part of the industry. Like 70% of turnover in this so-called longevity economy is selling supplements. Question, do we need supplements? Probably not. It depends, of course, individually, yes. But it's not like everybody needs the same supplements. There can be said something about magnesium, vitamin D, so lots of the normal stuff. But the more fancy one, I read these studies, I see these people, very often there is some economic motivation behind them. But they come in different categories that are interesting. So Senolytics, spoke to one of the professors here, when you are into cancer, and obviously you understand that this is a process you don't want to get rid of completely. Now, on the other hand, which supplement is going to completely do away with that? It's like with the antioxidants, where we've shown very clearly in the past that if you completely erase all the radicals, then you lose one communication tool within our body, and it's not positive. So everything that's to be done is about balance and really rebalancing the system and not doing something that is too stressful. But stress can be positive, like when we talk about hormesis, and that can be done like in, well, we call that biohacking, right? So whether that is cold exposure or heat exposure or red light or putting stress on your body to a certain degree by triggering regenerative effects is positive. Maybe it's not life prolonging because we don't have that clinical data because it's so hard. The endpoint is clear, but there's so many influencing factors that doing clinical studies is tough. But of course, increasing stress to a certain degree is interesting, and then you have metabolic modulators helping the body cope maybe with sugar intake. NAD precursors are big, so I mean everybody here has probably heard about N and R, and these are discussions, okay, which is the most bioavailable one? Do you really need that? Do you need to increase energy supply in mitochondria, and at which point? There's plasma exchange therapy and all that. That is interesting, but risky too. So, I mean, I know these processes where you sort of filter the blood and then heat it, and that can be like a combined process or individual stages. There is a company that I know that very recently put a guy into a coma, and maybe until like 3 months ago they were the hottest company around. So it's difficult. Peptides, we're going to talk a little bit about more about peptides because everybody seems to be crazy about them. Exosomes, similar situation. So we are now going into that field which is not available to doctors here in Europe most times. I mean, these substances come in different forms. They don't need to be human derived. So theoretically, it can be available to you, but then we're talking about cosmetics and stuff. So we're leaving the medical field behind. Psychedelics, interesting. I mean, from a scientific point of view. Stem cells. I mean, we do have, like, the FDA has, I don't know, 20 stem cell treatments at the moment. They're looking into greenlighting many more for rare diseases. So, of course, if you're out of options, very interesting. Do you want to do that if you're just having the feeling, I want to preventively do some anti-aging stuff? Difficult. Again, lots of anecdotal data. We work with doctors. We have faculty members that are doing stem cell treatments every week in places like Dubai or whatever. They claim to have tremendous results. Problem is we don't have the clinical studies, and it's very hard in these settings because these people are private, they are treating the sheikh's family, whatever. They're not going to enter a clinical study and trial. So we don't really know, and it's hard to endorse something that you don't understand. Gene editing, completely bonkers. I mean, interesting. It's going to happen at some point, but right now it's like fishing in the dark. What kind of genes you want to edit, and it's just a very complex system. I mean, I see it happening in the States where you do it in order to select the eye color of your baby. I told it before, I was on stage with the doctor Brian Johnson, and the doctor himself, he said, oh, I want to build more muscles, I'm going to have a gene therapy so it's easier. So, I mean, I leave that to you, whether that is the best strategy or maybe you want to go to the gym. Telomerase activation, again, completely theoretical. Of course, yes, I mean, telomeres is protective caps of our RNA. They're fraying as we go older, they become shorter, so eventually we have DNA instability, one of the hallmarks of aging. So addressing that theoretically is wonderful. I think even when we do that in worms, it can work, but in humans, clinical studies, no one who's going to try that. So we'll at some point see all of that become reality, but right now, I think we have to be very selective in what we endorse. Now, peptides is super interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, it's powerful. Peptides, hormones, I mean, this is an interchanging definition, right? It's shorter than a protein and it does something in your body. It's a communication signal essentially that is typically a little bit more centrally focused than hormones. So I would say from a safety profile it's a bit safer. And what's really important is we can generate these things. So from a corporate perspective, super cool. You create a molecule that you then own. It's never been in existence before. You own it, and you can do amazing stuff with it. And so synthesis is cheap. It's interesting. It's a workaround. It's better than a normal patent. And you get lots of these now looked at. Some of them come from actually Eastern Europe, a lot of Russian research and other things that deal with growth hormone, analogs, mimetics. Again, very difficult. We listed some that are very popular in the biohacking field. They come mostly from sports. I think that they became extremely popular like in the last couple of years. There was a real explosion. The FDA is super nervous about it because these kind of things, I mean, where do you get them from? You get them from the grey market. You don't really know where they are being synthesized, what's inside. So it's not just a question of understanding that peptide, but it's a question of, do I trust the provider of this? And it's actually quite hard to get good ones, and there are some tests out there that tell you, well, there are, in the production manufacturing process, there are problems, so there are impurities, etc. But I mean, they're interesting. I mean, I tried out some of them, the more regenerative ones, which I think have a clearer safety profile. It's definitely something to be said about them. The doctors look towards peptides at the moment because there is an increasing demand for them. And again, this is like out-of-pocket expense. This is a business. You run your clinic, you want to make some money. Patients want to have it, and they see it as something that's actually quite easy because they come in, and you know, these pens, you just insert them subcutaneously, very easy to do. I think the category, oh yeah, there is one that is actually quite recent because it got the green light from the FDA for some problems with mitochondrial activity. Now, as you grow older, obviously your mitochondria are losing effectivity, let's say. It's not that you have so many fewer ones, which is true as well, but they are definitely not as active anymore. So this is why we think, oh, there is less, energy production in our cells, and we want to do something about it. And this is where the craze about NAD drips or NMN supplements or NR supplements, where there is a discussion, okay, the precursors, which one is better? Can I actually take that orally, and does it still work? It's interesting. It's maybe risky if you have cancer. It's not completely established. This one is actually established, but it's not used, recreationally or, just as anti-aging. So this is if you have actual mitochondrial dysfunction. But it definitely shows the way of where we're going to go with this. So addressing hallmarks of aging, for instance, through peptides. And the peptides category that obviously is the biggest one at the moment is the GLP-1 agonists. So not all GLP-1 agonists are peptides, but most of them are. We got like 15 plus now under consideration or in development. Simply because the first generation, even the second generation, has some gastrointestinal side effects that you don't enjoy too much. But they have been proven to be quite effective at losing weight from, 5 to 20% of your body weight. So for obesity, it's originally designed for diabetes. It's actually quite an interesting and powerful way to treat that. You see many of the effects here. So it's working on the brain, on the heart. I mean, obviously, if you lose weight and you're overweight, it's going to affect your health positively in so many ways. It can't be overexpressed enough. I've been speaking at the National Bulgarian Obesity Conference, and I was reminded to be more concerned with the wording because they are very, I would say, concerned with treating obese people as a disease state. I think nowadays it's more shifting towards people saying, oh, I'm lazy, I just don't want to work out, I don't want to change how I eat. I just get my doctor to prescribe the GLPs and they use that. With all the problems that you see associated that are then maybe aesthetic, where you lose buccal fat, etc., where now a huge industry is forming all those hyaluronic acid filler companies that make injection courses on how to then fill up that part of your face again. Supplement companies that help you with the gastrointestinal problems, sort of priming you for increasing the dosage or taking on some of them. So it's an interesting part. We as GCLS, we're also in a research project together with Roche, a Swiss company in Basel, so very near to us, and they have their own GLP-1 agonist candidate. And what they look to do, and this is why we support them, I like it very much, is that we understand that people can't take these drugs forever. Because the doctors, when they see somebody who's obese, sometimes they say, well, you're on the drug, full dosage, and we keep going forever. Because maybe it's being paid by Social Security. So, and the pharma company, the industries, they understand they need to change this. Honestly, I mean, my understanding is they don't do it just because they're good people. The likelihood of payment from the insurance system is going to increase if you can show that there is a lasting effect even after the drug use has been stopped, because they don't want to keep on paying forever. But anyway, they look into how can we induce lifestyle changes to sort of keep these results. And that is interesting because it goes back to the question of how we can induce lifestyle changes at all, how we can motivate patients. And they are proposing to use an AI model, sort of a companion that is prescribed together with the drug, and then to help with the long-term outcome. So it's something that's being now researched by a student of ours and part of their master thesis, working in Basel with them, so that's, I think, really interesting. And I think this gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about overweight and obesity, because GLP-1s are, I think, for now, the future of longevity peptides. Because when you think about it, why are the other peptides not regulated or not claimed by pharma? Well, either they are from a risk profile still a bit dubious, or they don't have the efficacy that they're claiming. These guys, they don't mess around with waiting for things that where others make money. So at the moment, if you want to do peptide therapy as a doctor, if you're allowed to endorse it at all, well, you either go and tell your patient, oh, we need to go to a compounding pharmacy, have that created specifically for them, which is a workaround in some countries, or people, because they just, they read Reddit forums, they order it online, not really knowing what they're getting. Now, with weight loss, that is something that's really interesting. And what you see here is a bullet map where you see how many people are actually overweight, and in percentages. So everything where it's dark, there's a lot of fat people around, and that would have been a problem at the conference. And then you see that in the States, in GCC, in a lot of these countries that we consider longevity markets, there's actually an obesity problem going on. And it's very much combined. Because you have that metabolic issues, yes. I think in some of these countries there's also genetic predisposition for that. But it's also a bit lifestyle related. And then you understand why in Abu Dhabi, longevity medicine, which is the only country that regulates it, sees that mostly as lifestyle medicine. And everything that is, let's say, a bit more regenerative is discouraged or prohibited. And whereas in Dubai, everything is open and you get everything. So it's really about this rising number of overweight and obese people. And we see that here in the States, it's about 40% of the population right now. And it's rising and rising, and it's basically everywhere. And that is causing a problem for our healthcare system. And I think that longevity medicine, if we see that as something that we should be addressing, could be one way to deal with it. And I mean, again, a bit small for you, but something that maybe doesn't need to be hammered home in this setting, but very often people don't understand that obesity really is a huge risk factor for major diseases, and specifically those that in the end seem to kill off a lot of people, right? Like cancers like stroke, hypertension, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, even going down to things that are simple as sleep, mental illness, of course fertility and all these problems. So it contributes to those top killers when we look at the statistics of death annually. These are the very top. Yeah, this is from another study, just showing it's actually in the context of COVID, but that obesity really addresses a lot of these hallmarks of aging or processes like chronic inflammation, endocrine dysfunction, that lead to problems that eventually then make a person sick. Cancer, of course, again, obesity influencing that very much. And what you see here is again topics, and this was put together from a longevity standpoint. We look towards the hallmarks of aging. So chronic inflammation is one of the problems. Of course, there's an upregulation or dysregulation of hormonal pathways, altered microbiome, dysbiosis, again, things that are directly related to the hallmarks of aging. So, I mean, there is something people call this metabolically healthy obesity. People that are overweight, but the biomarkers are fine, they feel good. But still, we know for a fact that when this is being analyzed in clinical studies, they move from healthy to unhealthy. It's just a matter of time. So even if your short-term risk is low, it's going to be high in the end. And this is, I would say, the clearest indicator why treating with these things, ideally through lifestyle changes, maybe then through peptides as GLP-1 agonists, will have a huge impact on health trajectory and longevity. And yeah, the hallmarks of aging is a concept probably that you're all aware of. It's the best model that we at the moment have to describe aging as a process in our body. The hallmarks come in three forms, or three groups: primary, antagonistic, and integrative. I think what's important here, without needing to go through all of them, because we will select the ones that are in the context of obesity, is that you have a group of things that are basically damages. These are the primary ones. And they sort of trigger the next group, the antagonistic ones. Because these are processes that are actually dealing or resulting out of damage, and only when they start amassing to a certain point, your body can't deal with them anymore. Cellular senescence in itself is not a problem. If it takes overhand, of course it is, and then it starts causing the integrative hallmarks. So it's a very good model. I think it's probably not going to be the end of it. There will be new hallmarks. It used to be less, now it's this number, because we sort of start branching out into specific details. Now, the link between obesity and aging, again, there is a very, very good reason for linking them, because we see the same problems triggered by age itself and obesity, which is rapidly aging us, so to speak. So telomeres, we talked about it, these end caps of our DNA that prevent fraying, they are being reduced. Mitochondrial dysfunction, we also mentioned that. Excess nutrient intake completely destroys that, and alters function. Proteostasis, so altered proteostasis is another hallmark of aging, right? So in order for a protein to fulfill this function, it has to retain its 3D structure. If that is not the case, then it can't do what it's meant to do, and it does other things in your body. So again, this is compromised by obesity. Infrared nutrient sensing, I think that makes sense, that all those nutrient sensing pathways that are impacting our metabolic health are extremely impacted by this excess intake of nutrients and calories. Cellular senescence is prompted by obesity. So these are again all hallmarks that we saw before, and common inflammation as inflammation, maybe as a result of cellular senescence, of this cellular senescent cells expressing these SASP, these factors that are promoting inflammation in the surrounding tissue. So that, I think, is all very clear, and therefore we also have these studies that clearly show that long-term obesity induces biological aging. This was done in young adults, because being overweight while you're young is even worse than when you're old. This is starting to affect your system at a very early stage where things are still maybe being formed, and it gives you a different trajectory. And the findings were clear: fast epigenetic aging, shorter telomeres, high inflammation, all the growth factors. So, very, very big thing. And of course, when we look at mortality, I think that is the logical reaction. So does it actually kill us? Yes, obesity does. And you see, even in this statistic, which is the global burden of disease, a very interesting one, that 3.71 million people died as a consequence to obesity in the year 2024. And actually that's a good number, because the year before I think it was closer to 5 million. So, I mean, it's all interconnected here. We just selected these examples to give you an idea why we say, okay, looking at peptides as the most popular category in the moment in longevity intervention, should you be caring about things like kisspeptin to, I don't know, feel a bit more sexual drive? Should you look at melatonin too, to have a darker skin because you find that attractive? Should you mix with your growth hormone production? Probably not. Regeneration is nice, so BP157, TP500. But is there an underlying issue, or do you just see that as recreational use where everybody does that in the gym? If we want to look at medicine in the context of longevity, then GLP-1s are going to be extremely interesting, especially with the next generation. Question, of course, is how should they be used and applied? Should they be available to everyone? Is that something that we can afford from a healthcare perspective when we need to pay for this? But, I mean, there are other ways too, right? So, BMI assessment, right? When we talk back about functional testing in longevity medicine, we're not going to do a DEXA scan for every patient. Sometimes it can be simple stuff. The question is BMI simple or is it too simple? Well, it's a statistical tool. It's really nice, you know, very simple calculation, weight divided by height by 2. So, but it doesn't neglect the part of how the body is actually made up. So if you're working out a lot, if you have high muscle mass, low fat, you might have a high BMI, but you are of course not at risk the other way around. So actually there are other parameters maybe that doctors should look for, which could be a waist-to-hip ratio as a more useful predictor for mortality or the onset of age-related disease. And there are studies that prove this. So I think it's very clear, age modifies this. There is this obesity paradox where we see older people that have higher BMIs or are more obese regarded as more healthy. Well, there are explanations for this. It's definitely not healthy to have more fat, more visceral fat at least. I mean, we know the cold plunges, etc., should promote brown fat or white fat. So there are good types of fat too, and also in your diet, of course, you want to look for different plant-based fats like extra virgin olive oil or whatever. But when you look at this paradox, you have the situation that you have older people that may have cancer, that have other issues, that have suffering from sarcopenia, muscle loss, so they have a better BMI profile. So this is another explanation why you need to look further to that, functional testing, rib strength, other parameters, when you have older patients and you look towards them. And your clinical focus must be to in older people, prioritize muscle mass, strength, function, and not just look to BMI, especially when you start using GLP-1, because that is going to induce a little bit of muscle loss too. So you need to counter that with your patients. So yeah, I think generally speaking, when you look at longevity medicine, it's a very fast evolving field, but we need to underline the evolving part. It's very hard to find clear protocols, what to do, when to do it. It's easy on the diagnostic field, so we see a lot of clinics in Middle Europe focusing on the diagnostic part, which is interesting. I mean, sometimes it's also a question of your taste. So, for instance, doing liquid biopsies, looking for RNA fragments of cancer in your bloodstream. What is, if you find something, and you don't know whether you actually have cancer somewhere, or is that just a fragment of a cell, might get you a bit nervous. So I know some longevity clinicians that do this with their patients, but would never do it themselves because they're much nervous to find something. Full body MRI, very interesting, I did that. It basically forces you to look at organs that you otherwise would never look at. So it's nice to see, is there a cyst that you would have never known about before? Is it all necessary? The biomarkers, the blood panels, yes, for sure, we should check that more often. I think that can be made even more accessible and cheaper. And functional health. So it's funny because we spend so much time discussing the regenerative part of longevity medicine, stem cells, whatever. This is what everybody wants to be educated about, and the peptides, and then actually the things that are being applied more often are the basics. And that needs to be combined with traditional medicine, of course, looking into hormonal health, etc. There is a pairing in longevity medicine that goes hand to hand with certain focus points, let's say. Very often it's linked to aesthetics, because there is like beauty inside out, etc. So it's these people that are willing to invest money. It's out of pocket, it's very similar, you come back to your doctor regularly, so it's good to combine these things, right? So, I mean, I don't care if they come in for getting Botox shots, if that is a chance to check upon whether they are healthy or not. Women's health, I think, is a category that goes together especially well. I see it happening a lot in GCC, especially. I think it's sort of even an empowerment movement where this focus is now on including more females in clinical studies to highlight the differentiation between the sexes. So that is very interesting. But in general, we rely really on young doctors like yourself, the ones who are going to be how to shape that sector. And it's just important to remember that this is not something where you can look for influences leading the way, but it has to be rooted in science. We need to do research, and based on that research we need to do education, and that has to be in an academic setting, because there is a lot of distrust by patients in doctors, maybe as a remnant of the whole COVID discussion of getting vaccines or not, etc. So there is a lot of skepticism around, and I think we can only overcome that through education. Having great doctors is important. We need to educate all the other stakeholders because we need more investments into research. We need policymakers that start thinking about this. We need insurance companies making that more accessible and cheaper. And at the same time, we need to educate the broader population so they're not getting stuff from the internet that might not be very good for them. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity today, and I'm sure you guys have some questions, so happy to take them.
Thank you, Professor Thor. It was most inspiring. Okay, students, so if anyone has any questions or comments, you're welcome to share them. You can indicate by raising your hand or something. Any questions? No?
There is one.
You mentioned the difficulty you don't get the best in Europe. How do you get longevity medicine in Europe? How would you get into it? You know, studying here in Bulgaria.
Well, difficult. The question is what you want to do. So if you think that a longevity doctor or physician should be doing the same things as in Southeast Asia, then it will probably fail because of regulatory differences, right? So some things might not be available to you as tools, and maybe rightly so. So we as an education institute, we are not endorsing specific technologies, and we try to remain open-minded, but of course we want to look at safety and efficacy studies before we can really promote this. But other than that, we inform about peptides, we have courses on stem cell therapy, etc. And we discuss this in our events. But I'll just say, I think when you work as a longevity physician here, choose that term, or just try to improve healthy aging or health span, if you will. It doesn't need this terminology of longevity. I mean, we used it to differentiate ourselves, but I think in some cases it sort of creates a tension that is not required. If you work as a doctor and you want to ensure healthy aging, then you will look to some of these things, and it will be your responsibility to choose what's available to you and what's best for the patient. And I think that the diagnostic route is very interesting at the moment because we get to better understand our patients. And I mean, doesn't aging clock, I mean, even a combination of some different ones. Some give you like the biological age, others give you the rate of aging, some give you organ-specific, epigenetic, or whatever age assessments. I mean, it's interesting, it needs to be combined with a bigger picture of other tests. But that is a safe way to do it. It's maybe in a way where insurances can actually pay for some of them, which is good for the patients. And it's a very low-risk way to deal with, let's call it longevity from a doctor's perspective. If you're endorsing stuff that is not available. I know doctors in Bulgaria that do stem cell treatments illegally, and not in person. They say, oh, I believe in this, I want to offer it to my patients. I select the patients, they're not going to complain if something goes wrong. Well, I'm not sure about that.
In terms of the connection between obesity and all the many medical issues, have you found that it's mostly the weight or the malnutrition that tends to cause these?
Well, I think that the pure weight might not be so good for your joints, but of course it's the overexposure to certain nutrients and calories that sort of puts the body, I mean, some of them, hurt, I don't know, the arteries directly. Other things is just disallowing the body putting itself into a regenerative state and being in a growth mode the whole time, etc. So it's a combination of many things, but it's a rather simple way to address some of the problems that materialize with aging. So we can't do anything about aging itself yet, but of course we can prevent things that are accelerated.
So is it mainly the fat, like the lipids, as the issue in this case?
No, it's sugar, it's everything. But of course it changes the composition of your whole body, and then you will have more inflammatory fat deposits in your body, and this again then triggers other things. So very often it's not a disease state in itself. I mean, obesity is regarded as such, but being overweight not, but it's a risk factor.
Thank you.
So, is there like any research about the DNA methylation? Like, if you can reverse it, and the difference between countries?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, about methylation we know exactly. We have tons of studies that we can reverse epigenetic expression rather than markers, and that it's of course under a shift, aging related in general, but that we can bring back, let's say, the original programming from lifestyle. Maybe not 100%, but we definitely can make an impact. There are other ways to do it with supplements and other stuff. There is always the problem with the limited size of the cohorts, etc. But definitely we have very clear indications that it's going to help us from a lifestyle perspective, and I think it's a wonderful explanation why we should be following these guidelines, because everybody hears about, well, you should be working out, you shouldn't be sitting in front of the TV, you shouldn't be eating too much chocolate. Kind of boring, we've been hearing this forever. I think epigenetic, the best thing about them is that we now have understanding and can explain to people why they should be doing these things. This is sort of driving the whole experience. So when you look at the book from David Sinclair, that I think for many has been the first introduction to longevity science, like almost 10 years ago, it was exactly this finding that we can modulate our biology, if you will, through things that we do. I mean, he was, of course, mostly focused on selling the substances that we develop, but it was also a lot about lifestyle intervention. And that is something that we try to even establish now as a program for kids. So we have an AI kind of tool in the works that is meant to be provided to schools for free, educating about longevity and aging biology, of course in a way that it's accessible to kids, really helping them to understand why their parents give this advice. Because on its own, who likes to hear or watch your television? I mean, I think it's even with young people, it's good to give them understanding, you know, what should be done for what reason.
So when we talk about longevity, I think we all believe it is actually living longer and better. And I can say that among my colleagues and friends, we all try to live better, to have a healthy lifestyle, and take our health, like we're doing sports, nutrition, and everything so on. We take it into consideration, but I wanted to ask you, do you think that there is a risk that people become too obsessive about those things? And don't understand me wrong, I'm a huge fan of healthy living and so on. But do you think there is a risk that people stop living their lives because they want to be extra healthy in some way? And what is the limitation? When can we say, okay, I'm having fun this time, and I will choose the healthier option one at a time?
Yeah, 100%. So I think those people that are the most involved in this are completely neurotic, trying to track everything, keeping meal plans, tracking their peptides, being completely crazy about it. Of course, this is not the way to do it. When you look at those studies with the blue zones, I mean, it's a bit outdated now, and if you look nowadays at the blue zone, like Okinawa, there is no extended life expectancy because they become internationalized, they have the same food as everywhere else, the same things with life. But looking back at those original studies, it showed there was a certain kind of lifestyle that was a bit more relaxed, and if you put yourself under stress, just in order to, reach a certain goal, it's not going to be healthy. Working out, and I mean the younger generation definitely is different because I think that is clear from all the numbers, even from club owners and restaurants. People are drinking less, they're going out less, but now they're shifting from drinking to recreational drug use. Yes, they do more sports, but 50% of these guys take either steroids or peptides or some other things. So it's sort of shifting. It's not just getting better. I think what's getting better is the interest in your biology and more, let's say, preventative approaches, but it can be taken to an extreme. So therefore, this is why I said the doctor should be the guide here, provided that he's educated in the space. Because if you let people, just run wild on their own using, ChatGPT, then it might be a bit too much maybe.
I had a question regarding pharmacogenomics. So I've read that it's becoming more of a upcoming field, especially in pharmacy. I just want your opinions on it.
Well, longevity in general. So in terms of drugs, we don't have longevity drugs right now, right? We have repurposing off-label use of drugs, whether that's metformin or rapamycin, or we have the GLP-1s, but we don't have a longevity drug as such. We have the compounding pharmacies that look to, promote these peptides mostly. But it's definitely, we need that research. The problem with the research is I think we don't have the clinical endpoints. Yes, longer life, etc., but we're not sure about, we don't have the aging clocks that we can trust. So it's very hard to run clinical studies. But of course, pharmacists are very important, or chemists, in order for us to build these substances that can modulate the pathways that we just learned about. Hopefully all of them. So in terms of the supplements, I think the only one that is supposed to affect all the 12 hormones of aging is taurine, which before that we mostly knew from Red Bull, and at least the way that I drank Red Bull, so ugly with a lot of vodka, it wasn't very healthy. So I don't know, it's definitely something that's ongoing, and we have a couple of pharmacists that are actually studying in our program, which I find wonderful. It's my background. So I'm not a medical doctor, I switched over to pharmacy, and definitely we need more money invested into that. The problem is money in medical research, when you think about pharmacological substances, has to be linked typically with a disease state, because otherwise you don't get that kind of investment back as a pharma company. We talk about billions of US dollars, or at least hundreds of millions if you use maybe some AI models to reduce the cost. And unless we regard aging as a disease, which currently is not the case, then it can't be prescribed, and it's out-of-pocket expense, and there's just not enough money in that. So we will see, if anything, off-label use of drugs.
How do you think we can make longevity science more accessible to the majority of people? Because right now, judging from your presentation, it sounds like there's only a few people who are very interested in longevity and in their health. So it's not accessible for a lot of people yet. Hopefully in the future it will be, but which steps should we as future doctors take to support our patients to make it more accessible for them?
I understand your question, and you're right. I think it's not accessible because it's a complex topic that is so multifactorial, and it requires a lot of understanding from the patient, and the blind trust that they have in doctors has long eroded. So it's maybe the other way around, even that people distrust their doctors explicitly. So Dana White from the UFC recently said he doesn't trust doctors when it comes to his health. And he's not an example, I think, for all the clever people in the world, but it's definitely going into that direction as a result of many medical crises, whether that's the opioid crisis in the US or something linked maybe to Corona and all that, where people have the feeling that they can't trust their doctors and they have so much other information available to them, whether that's AI generated or on social media, where they think, well, these guys are also not their job. Or they speak from experience, and they don't understand that N of 1 is not a way to assess a new compound. Just because it works for one person and is safe doesn't mean you can start using that on your own. And I think education in general is going to help with that. We need to begin at an early stage. We have to integrate that into biology. I mean, it's nice learning about bees and, I don't know, mixing different colors of flowers, but maybe we should be focused more on addressing these issues, starting at an early age to approach people and explain to them exactly about epigenetics, for instance, and some stuff. And it can be in a way that is accessible. We don't need it to be so accessible that they think they can find their own way through that. So this is the job of the doctor, and it should remain so. And the tools that we develop should support the doctors and not sort of empower the patients. But it's a very difficult field. So in Switzerland, Western Switzerland, there is a chain of pharmacies run by a family, and the owner, he's tremendous. He's like the Pierce Brosnan pharmacy, super fit, healthy, attractive, older guy, very rich. I'm not sure if he's married, so please don't ask me. But this guy, I met him, and he said, fantastic what you guys are doing. So we're building sort of an AI app for people to help questioning their doctor's decisions. So this is a pharmacist that actually makes money from dispensing drugs. But he said, I think they're over-prescribed, and I want to have each patient, when they get something from the doctor, checking whether that is actually true, or could there be alternative ways to deal with the problem. And I mean, this is coming from somebody who's part of the system. So I think it shows that we have a distrust of doctors. That is, I think, there's so many reasons, and doesn't need to be addressed individually. It has to be addressed, as part of the educational program. And of course, it's important to keep updated as doctors, because part of the distrust is maybe when you hear about it, you see this Netflix series about Brian Johnson, then you go to your doctor and start talking to them, and they have no clue. Of course, as a patient, you start seeing a question mark in their eyes. I think this is one of the reasons why we do what we do. We start discussing this, even the things that are maybe not at this point regarded by Western doctors or medical associations to be something that is endorsed, but just to have the information out there on many levels, and hopefully in schools, and hopefully, at some point, we might even have to discuss if doctors need to bring back the social media realm. But there are good reasons why doctors are actually prevented legally from promoting their services on these platforms. So, but if it's done purely educational, I think it's possible from a legal point. But it's tricky.
Thank you.
I think you had another question.
In terms of the PowerPoint, you labeled telomerase activity as under extreme scrutiny. Is that due to the need for human volunteers for testing? Is that due to the ethics of gene editing? Why is that?
Well, it's simply down to the risk, right? So usually it's a question of risk and result, right? With something where I potentially kill people, this is not my number one choice of doing things, but from a research perspective, I think we need to define a trial process where we can try these things. But the question is, what are we looking for? I mean, if we look for longevity, how are we going to track that? This is the problem with longitudinal studies of aging. Unless we create biomarkers of aging that we can actually trust, it's almost impossible to do these clinical evaluations. It's just very hard, or at least it's very expensive.
So there have been no studies on this at all so far?
Well, there are studies, but not so much from an aging perspective that I know of, or at least in a very small cohort sort of stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
What are your thoughts on the wide availability and usage of Ozempic in regions such as GCC?
Well, I mean, I think Mounjaro is better in terms of the safety profile and the side effects. You will have less bloating and all other problems. You might also have a better effect because it's working a bit differently. But of course, listen, I'm somebody who likes it, who I have the time to do sports, and of course it feels to me a little bit of cheating if you just use it in order to slim down when it's not necessary. But from a medical perspective, I think it's fantastic what we have here, and if next generations are even better than we are, it's definitely something that we should be using. But we have to be mindful of the fact that there are side effects, not just GI related, but to have, for aesthetic reasons, muscle loss too. So I think we should be a little bit careful with that. But I mean, especially in GCC, you have such an obesity problem, such a prevalence of diabetes or pre-diabetes that like 70% of the population are pre-diabetic. So I mean, maybe don't quote me that maybe it's 60%, but it's definitely very high. So it's good that we have this option, but it should be considered in the larger picture. If that is the right thing for that patient, should it be something that we keep people on, or should we look at into the let's say problems that are there lifestyle related? And especially in GCC, it's a lifestyle issue where we see maybe the older generation actually have a better health trajectory or larger life expectancy than the younger one, because they started, changing their diet, not being active so much, being more inside or whatever. It's hard. I mean, it's a kind of, actually they have a lot of vitamin D deficiency there, which you wouldn't expect because the sun is shining the whole day, but they're not going outside and it's extremely hot. So I think it's definitely something that's very interesting, but it's maybe now being used and endorsed by celebrities to just lose their weight at a moment in time when that is not necessary.
Are there any resources that you recommend you go for independently after this talk?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Hello?
Yes.
Are there any resources you'd like us to go over independently after this talk?
Yeah, you want to read up on that? Well, there are some, freely available. I would say that, for instance, Huberman Lab is quite interesting as a podcast because you get to hear a lot of sometimes it's contradictory, but it's definitely not someone who I would say is a bad researcher, so that is quite interesting. I would say if you want to read something, read Peter Thiel's book. It's actually not as thought-provoking as you might think in the beginning, because it's covering a lot of classical medicine and how he thinks you should be addressing cancer and heart disease and hypertension and so on. But these are typically very good-to-go things like popular podcasts and books in the space. And then, of course, once you did that, I think it's always worthwhile to look really into the clinical evidence that we have, or maybe it's preclinical if it's interesting. So there are tons of studies now out from various researchers that are interesting. I mean, honestly, I sometimes going to these conferences, I'm a bit bored by just hearing results from lungworms and mice and etc. That are just preclinical. So it's nice to see some people trying to bring that into the clinical application field. But I mean, we definitely need both. So definitely that would be step number 2. There is a new publication out there that is called Longevity by Taylor and Francis. That is a journal that is spearheaded. The editor-in-chief is the head of the Aging Research Center at King's College London. So very well-recognized basic science researcher, Professor Richard Sell. I think that is going to be very interesting. They are all open access, so we're going to publish some stuff there. And then you have, of course, all the other major journals that are interesting. Biogerontology is another one that is focused on this field, but I mean, obviously, when you have something that's really cool, you want it to be in nature, so you get to see them everywhere. So start maybe with some of the books, and I think the Huberman Lab podcast is actually quite interesting. I mean, I would take everything with a grain of salt and read up on the sources if they provide them, but still interesting.
Hello. My question is, if longevity medicine were to become mainstream, would it create a tiered healthcare system?
A better healthcare system?
A tiered healthcare system.
Oh, well, no. I think our job is to ensure that this is going to be accessible to as many people as possible. and we do so by stable manufacturing. Typically, there is economies of scale. The more doctors you have, the cheaper it will become, simply because it's a very labor-intense kind of medicine. So when you look at aesthetics, which is also out of pocket and therefore very similar, you go in there, you get your Botox shot, that's maybe 7 minutes, and that includes hi and how are you doing, and then you're out again. If you think about longevity medicine and all those tests that we quickly discussed and the many more things that you can do, you spend a lot of time there. This is more like internal medicine is meant to be, right? Spending time with your patient, understanding them, etc. And obviously you have to pay your doctor for that. And therefore it's costly. So we have to look into ways of how to make people in charge understand that preventative healthcare measures, in the end, save money. That's the thing. I mean, we can educate doctors as much as we want, but to really change the system, we have to educate the regulators and insurance officers and whatever. And I think that is something that's actually quite difficult to achieve. And the only thing that you can do is you have to speak the language, and ultimately that language is money. If you show that people will be more healthy, there are less healthcare costs, they will work longer, they will pay more into the system, and this is a way to change the problems that we see across many countries now, and are going to arise in many more. So I'm actually a proponent of using longevity medicine as one way to mend, I wouldn't call it a broken system, but a system that is very much in a state of repair.
I just wanted to ask, what motivated you to do this specific field of research?
Oh, well, I studied pharmacy and then for a couple of years worked actually in banking. As many, I was lured by the fact that investment banking gives you a good payment when you're in your 20s. That's actually way better than working as someone in the healthcare system. And at some point I realized this is boring for me and I wanted to go back, and I had lots of friends still from my days actually studying medicine. I switched over to pharmacy and did that. And they were involved in some very interesting research, mostly linked to cellular pathway modulation, and that very much so in the context of different alpha. And that was like 12 years ago or 13, so that was way before the Nobel Prize, but very interesting nonetheless at Stanford. And they were looking at small molecule drugs and how they interacted with the pathway in the context of wound healing, but also some ischemic, arts drugs, etc. So quite interesting. And I onboarded that team, did some research, and back then already in California, the term longevity, this kind of research, these things was already very hotly discussed, and a lot of it comes from the US, and it's US doctors, right, Sinclair and the others. I don't have to say this was working at the UK, but anyway. So this got me into the field, and at some point, we were doing research together with a number of European universities and a little bit Mayo Clinic and others, and we tried to get some study group off the ground, maybe an institute, and the problem was that putting that into existence in a medical institution, a medical university, was difficult, because a lot of what we cover here is not strictly speaking medical, but it has of course medical implications, but it's psychology or whatever, and it needs to be integrative, so otherwise it wouldn't have to be new. If we just look at biochemistry, we have a wonderful biochemistry department already in place. So at some point we said, okay, we need to set up something of our own, a private school, and that in some ways resembles the transitioning of public health as a scientific domain away from medicine that has happened 100 years ago, which I think is now going to take place with longevity science. Because like back then, we understood what are the drivers of disease, germs, whatever, and that we need sanitization, that we need clean water, that we need waste removal. We now understand what are the things that are driving aging, the hallmarks, and whatever else we're going to discover. So it's very similar to that point, and again, it's going to be private schools going to do this first, and then it's going to be hopefully integrated within medical curricula and wherever it's necessary. So I'm hoping that we will see more and more medical universities teaching about this, and I know for a fact that I'm a visiting professor in Bucharest, And there at the medical university, you have to take a course as a medical student in obstetric medicine in the 4th year, I think. So we were seeing first little steps towards that direction. And you know, for me, it was just extremely interesting. If you want, it's the biggest step that we're going to see in our lifetime. You know, it's an age of biology now. Yes, we use tech to drive that, but essentially it's that, and it's a chance for Europe, because we missed out, I think, on AI, we missed out a little bit on energy, we missed out on the automotive thing, so it would be nice if we can get the whole healthcare thing under control.
Thank you.
Okay, well, happy to discuss any peptide stacks in the break.
So, dear students, thank you all for all your comments and questions, of course. And we'd also like to let you know that the lecture will be uploaded to the YouTube channel of Professor Buglarska, so you will have access to it. And if you want to leave a comment, you can, of course, do that. We encourage you to do so. And thank you for your participation.